Welcome back to Strange Exiles, a podcast about ideas, identity, and ideology. I'm your host, Bram E. Gieben. This month, over on our Substack, my ongoing series about male identity under late capitalism, crisis masculinity, is continuing. It's really coming along. I think we're about halfway through now. And I've had some recent guest posts for paid subscribers featuring writers like Bryce Nance of 3 Billion Nances, Jason Miles of This Is Revolution, and Brad Kelly of Method and Madness. And I've got some brilliant guest essays from other people coming up soon. In case you missed our recent special collaborations with Revol Press, they're also available on Substack, YouTube, and wherever you get your podcasts. In the past few weeks, I've spoken to Rob Four Walker, who has a book coming up about Carl Jung, and Gareth Stewart Farmer, who writes about his lived experience of autism. So check those episodes out if you missed them. Today, my guest is a good friend and Glasgow legend, Keira McLean. Keira is an artist and tutor and co-runner of the company RDW Glass, who make exquisite stained glass windows, often with a distinctly socialist twist. Keira also makes zines, runs workshops in communities, and has produced some incredible artworks celebrating Glasgow's left-wing tradition. Her latest venture, a thrilling piece of workers' theatre called The Fire That Never Went Out, is currently in the process of being made and brought together. We're going to talk all about that. And she's just found out her work is going to be featured in the upcoming Glasgow International Festival of Art, which is very exciting news. Keira, welcome to the show. Welcome to Strange Exiles.
Thank you for having me. I like how you called me a Glasgow legend. I like that. I'll take it. And my daughter's friend sometimes when he's drunk calls me Mrs. Glasgow.
I mean, we first met through my wife. I think next to the RDW Glass studio is the cooperative where my wife was working at the time.
Yes, indeed, and they own the building. Yeah,
and you number share a particular sense of humor. I think that brought you together in the smoking section outside.
We basically hate the same things and the same people.
Yeah,
so
yeah.
Nothing bonds you better than hatred. The
it's a good common ground. Yeah, absolutely. But yes, you're like a previous guest. We had Neil Scott on quite recently, and like Neil, you're often seen popping up at little bits of theatre or spoken word or bookshop events that I find myself at. So yeah, we've been in each other's orbit for a while, but it's a real pleasure to get you on and talk in depth about your work. Thanks for coming along.
Thanks for having me.
Brilliant.
I'm excited to be. You did forget to mention though that I also sometimes go swimming with your dad.
Yeah, I wasn't sure if that was which
is really weird and brilliant,
relevant, but yeah, also my dad's swimming partner. Yeah, it's good. I've recently moved back to Glasgow, so we're hoping to see a bit more of each other.
Yes, we're so happy to have you back where you belong.
It's very nice to be, in the warm bosom of the Republic of Shawlands, which is where we're coming to you for today's show. So. Listen, I mean, I think I first became of your work and your socialist politics through your stuff, your work with stained glass. For people that maybe don't know anything about the process of what goes into making stained glass, or, how that would come to be a thing that you could use as a form of political expression. I want to get into that, but first of all, I wanted to ask you, how did that journey begin for you? Like, when did you get into that, and where did it start?
Okay, so it's a really random kind of story. I had been living on my own since I was kind of 15, and I got pregnant at 17. So I was a kind of young mum, did a series of really crap jobs, as you do, loads of different things, and had ended up being a fake radio phone-in person. So when they say, such as Keira's on the line from Glasgow, about 30% of those people are fake or plants because you get too many crackpots, is the point. So it was my job to kind of talk about different things, and I would use the fact that I was a single mum, and I really liked that, right? And I thought, I know, I'll go to college because I was bored. Wasn't intellectually stimulated by the kind of things I was doing. Karen had got a bit older, so I thought I'll go to college and I'll sign up for radio production. And the course was full, and there was like a year to wait. And then there was stained glass, just on a complete whim. Signed up, and here we are.
Amazing. So you never sort of went to art school and specialized in that. It just kind of came into your life.
Well, I joined a college course, and the college course was called. It's actually no longer exists. And one of the things I'm involved with is try to bring that back, because if you're working class, you can no longer train really as a stained glass artist unless you have lots of money, or it's a really difficult process to go through. So the college course I did was called Architectural and Decorative Glass. It was the last year that that course existed. And it taught you how to take glass out, how to make stained glass, how to work at height. So it effectively taught you the trade of stained glass, how to do repair and restoration, which is really your bread and butter as a glass artist. And obviously Glasgow as well, it has this rich tradition of stained glass. It was the centre of the best stained glass production in the world in the 1900s. It housed the best artists, the best studios. A lot of Glasgow artists had studios in Glasgow and in London. It was all part of that rich, period of engineering, of decorative arts, of that kind of intellectual, cultural boom that was happening in Glasgow at that time. Stained glass was very much part of that. And in fact, the old studios, a lot of them were down where the motorway is, down by the Mitchell. So a lot of the studios were destroyed in the 60s.
Yeah.
We've lost that history. That's a kind of ongoing story of Glasgow anyway, about how it removes and disregards and destroys its heritage and tries to reinvent itself.
Yeah.
Always, I think, less successfully with each sort of attempt, but
Yeah, I mean, I've lived in a fair few Glasgow tenements in my time, and quite a lot of them, you've seen either the windows in the close, or the sort of in the transom above the front
yeah,
door, or even in the front door itself. You
yeah,
do see a lot of stained glass in
it's
Glasgow.
everywhere.
Yeah, so that kind of comes out of that tradition. Are there any like bits of Glasgow, like particularly impressive examples of it, which you went to see and were like, wow, okay, I'm inspired by this?
City chambers. I mean, everywhere, every Victorian building of grandeur pretty much has an amazing window. The old adage about Glasgow, look up, get off your phone, look up, stop staring at your shoes, look up. It's kind of everywhere. I mean, Cottes is a famous example. Daniel Cotte, he sort of trained with Morris and Co. and William Burne-Jones and became a really big international kind of art superstar outside of Scotland. This is also the story of Scottish
Mm,
arts and heritage, that these people go off and become very, very successful and very revered artists elsewhere. But in our own country, we kind of disregard that culture, that history. But
mm.
yeah, there's loads of, I mean, it's a great question. What do you think? What do you think? In Glasgow, particularly, City Chambers certainly has some great glass. Cottes is worth a look. There's a great window. It's not by a Scottish glass artist. It's by a famous Irish glass artist called Harry Clark. That's in the Kelvin Grove. The Borough collection, since it reopened up, its whole top floor has all of this glass that was sitting in storage for like 20 years. You can now see it. You can get really close to it and see the detail. So it's kind of everywhere.
Mhm. In terms of it being like a career, like
Mm.
would it be a sustainable career to be the kind of person who is doing repairs on, bits of stained glass that are in a beautiful old building that you've bought a part of? Is that like, I guess what I'm getting at is it as much a trade as it is an art
Yes,
form?
I would say it was, yeah. And actually the art world sort of treats it like a craft and a trade.
Interesting.
um, which can be especially like galleries or studio works. Studio glass, which is blown glass, kind of objet d'art and glass, hot glass, which is decidedly different from stained. That is considered more of an elite art form in galleries and whatnot. Stained glass. I mean, you do see some stained glass, but stained glass is architectural. So for me, it really belongs in a building. It belongs to the and it's part owned by that building in a way. you know, I think, you've got to consider its situation when you're making it and designing
Mm,
it. Who's seeing it? Where is it visible from? How does the light hit it? So in that sense, it's completely, an architectural medium. It spills out of its boundaries in which
mm.
it's kept. So it doesn't really belong in a gallery. It really belongs in a city and, in our cityscape and our streets.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's really interesting. Do you think that's what makes it lend itself to depicting things that are either, historically or culturally
Mm,
significant to the place, but also can lend itself to sort of being a community art form as well?
yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's a storytelling medium. It just happened to tell the stories of the rich and powerful because
Yeah.
that's who paid for it. Part of my work is also about that decolonisation project that is about making stained glass represent the ordinary everyday histories or the extraordinary everyday histories of working folk. But that's what it does. It tells a story. It was designed to awe and shock and tell the story not just of the building, but of the people who built it, the city itself, and it can still do that. I think sometimes we have a lot of glass artists have this very narrow idea of what stained glass is. It's conservatorship, and
Mm.
it's white gloves. And actually, in a job in studio, you've got to get that done and make that last another 150 years. You've got a limited budget and you're on the clock. And I think we've lost that way of working. And as a result, we're losing a lot of our glass because there's not enough people to save it, to work with it.
Yeah. So, if anything, rather than being one of these courses that might sort of disappear or vanish, although it sounds like the one you attended could. I mean,
It did.
it's a
It has.
sector that
Yeah,
you
it's
could
gone.
yeah, but it sounds like it is a sector that you could reinvigorate if you were
And this
able to get the
this is
right
part of
people.
our wider project. So we were very
Yeah.
close to getting a college course at the beginning of this year, and we had a form of funding that was basically this form of funding was removed. So 2 weeks prior to us announcing a college course that was going to exist at Cardonald, bring it back, we lost the funding. So we've had to kind of regroup. And part of what we're engaged with just now at the studio is that I was teaching international residencies with a gallery down in Dumfries and Galloway. And it was great. I did 3 of them. It was great. We got international artists teaching them the basics of stained glass, how to basically start working, right? But I was like, do you know what? I'm too far from Glasgow to really do this properly. So now, this year in September, we're going to do it here. And part of it is also to build that reputation in the studio so it'll be easier to convince funders to give us 20 grand to set up a college course for 1
Mm.
year, 10 learners, right? That's nothing in the grand scheme of things. But also to create this kind of part of that internationalist solidarity across other working class glass artists in different places, that we've got to work together and do this for ourselves, because if we don't do it, it's not going to get done.
Yeah. Yeah. See, I love
Yeah.
that, and that's the kind of thing the government should be backing if they want university courses to lead to, a trade that you can follow, and
Mhm.
it shows as well that you can do something that's like trade focused but still
Yeah.
has a massive artistic value. Yeah, that should be the kind of thing they're chucking money at for sure. So I wanted to
Mm.
talk about a few of the
Mm.
kind of like key projects that you've
Okay.
done with stained glass. Like one of your sort of big milestones was a celebration of the revolutionary organizer John McLean, and that's
Oh, my hero, my man.
yeah, that's in Pollock Shaw's library. So what interests you so much about his story and that kind of Red Clydeside era?
Well, I kind of come from that tradition um, of that kind of Glaswegian. So my parents were communists, actually.
Mm,
Um, and it has its own kind of interesting um I don't know what to say. It was an interesting childhood. It was problematic in some ways, but it gave me that lens early on. And once you've got that kind of lens on the world, it's very difficult to turn it off. So it was really advantageous in that way. And it was just, I was around storytellers, trade unionists, we were around that history. I was born in 79, so the 80s was a huge period of strikes, the miners' strikes. I mean, Thatcher. I like to say I was radicalised by a hate preacher. Her name was Margaret Thatcher. It's true. You know, she is so still hated in kind of social Scotland. So I kind of grew up around it, and it was there. But then at the other side of it, my uncle was quite a Glasgow famous journalist called Jack McLean,
mm,
who became a bit of a caricature of how he started. But he started as a trade unionist. He was kind of plucked by Harry Reid, editor at that time of the Glasgow Herald, from kind of working class obscurity and given a kind of Friday column, and he became a bit of a folk hero because he wrote about his working class history, his working class background. He was very verbose. Jack's writing was all about showing you how smart he was and what he'd read, and his columns are kind of interesting. He was a great writer, actually, and he was a difficult person, but that's fine. I loved him dearly, and he drove me mental. But so I was also kind of around that
mm.
milieu folk and storytellers and guys in pubs. So I just it kind of grew from there, and then reading about McLean, Willie Gallagher, but the women of the Red Clydeside as well, Mary Barber, Helen Crawford. I'm a big fan of Helen Crawford. It just kind of was there. It was always there, and it kind of got into me. It got into my bones a little bit.
Mm-hmm. And for folks listening, outside of Scotland who might not know about that, like, what period did this cover? That kind of the peak of that Red Clydeside era, where the unions were strong, and Glasgow was it's the second city of empire, was what they used to call it. It was where all the ships were built. What kind of period was John McLean operating in?
So he's he died in 1923. So you're really talking about 1900 to 1923. But it's interesting. It's like, Glasgow was always a place of contradiction at that time. So unions weren't, but they were strong. Industrial unions were, but McLean's project was much wider. He was actually an educator, a teacher, a Marxist teacher. So he was interested in lifting people out of poverty and obscurity through education. And then he stopped being allowed to teach. And so he sat on the street, he walked from place to place. I actually have always been looking for a connection with John McLean and the Craigellachie fire, because I'm convinced he would have known about it and would have walked to it. And the only thing I found is that Bob Grieve, who we can talk about later, who was a famous urban developer and a fire sitter, his mum was one of two women who were trusted to bring John McLean his food in prison, because McLean got very, very paranoid. The state effectively killed him through its barbarism, through force feeding, through paranoia. And he was very paranoid about his food being poisoned. And it was Bob Grieve's mum was allowed to bring. So it's this weird. So I think it's just the time. I mean, it is you can have a very nostalgic view about that. I think we were always up against it. There's so much argument amongst historians about whether Red Clydeside is oversold, if we would have had that revolution at George Square or not. But I think you can't deny, the myth is really the thing that hooks people into the movement. It helps politicize them. It helps give them a sense of grounding in history. So for me, myths are almost just as important as facts, in a sense. I really like the myth is just as important of the man. What was interesting when we were working with John McLean, what an amazing revolutionary he was, but he was kind of a terrible husband,
Really? That's the kind of thing you uncover when you start digging into.
Agnes loved him, and he loved her, but he was so involved. The movement came first. It came before his kids. It came before. So he had a better relationship with Nan, and then his other younger daughter, he didn't. Obviously, there's better people to talk about this, but, those contradictions, of course, affect the myth. But you're like, I like to, in all the windows, put those contradictions in. I'm a bit of a maximalist with design, put as much information, much text, much reading. So the viewer, every time they look at the window, they will see something different, something new. And it really is about sparking chat and interest and discussion, dialogue, anyway, rather than presenting some sort of factual, accurate history. Because how do you capture a life, a person, a person like John McLean who lives in memory, also, in myth? You can't, but you can make an attempt at that. And I suppose that's what the windows are about, really.
So what does that moment in the process look like, where you've been researching somebody, you've been reading around it, you've started to get some visual ideas? Like, what's that moment like when it all comes together and you're like, okay, this piece goes here, this piece goes here?
It was not as revelatory, help me, as it would seem. And it also depends, because McLean was a window that I made. I actually physically made myself, but usually I make the windows with a community group. So the idea is, like, we have that commission as 10, 12 artists. So we research it all together. So for me, it's more satisfying in a way when you're working with a group and they start to see the pattern or the composition or all of it, the narrative that we've been building in the window appear. So I definitely prefer working collaboratively. But then sometimes you need your own wee project just to clear the cobwebs. You know what I mean? Take a break from that.
Absolutely.
But with McLean at the window, and a Stuart Christie window, and that's my favourite window. The Stuart Christie window in Mayday Rooms is my favourite window. But you're never happy, Bram. You know that. You're never happy with the song, the album, the artwork, the window. You look at it, you're like, oh my God, I'd do that differently. You're chasing. That's what you're chasing. You're chasing that all the time, whether it's a window or a play or whatever.
And what was the first spark that led you to take that approach though of like, I'm going to go and engage with a community of artists, going to find collaborators, and we're going to build something together. How did that first strike you as a way you wanted to approach this?
I think just read politics, like my own politicization, my lived experience of, not having power. I always say this, but nobody understands power than people who don't have it. Your
Mm,
proximity to power absolutely defines your understanding of it. So feeling left out of things and really reading theory, going, wait a minute, people are having conversations about people like me and the way I live, and I'm not part of that, and that's not all right. So it was then, and I felt left out, and you feel like an imposter and all this kind of thing because you feel excluded whether you are or not. So reading, and then coming across artists like Test Department, right? Situationists, Test
mm,
Department, 784. Just reading about the way they were making work, like that is exciting. And I did get a bit fed up, get invited to do white cube type group shows with a broad
mm,
theme of, feathers or whatever. I was just like, I don't want to do that. I want to construct narrative. I want to make new work every time. I want to work with people who think like me. I want it to be political. And that just started happening. And then, things like Cabaret Voltaire, when we did that, the Mad magazine, feminist magazine, Scud, it was all just ways of working with people I wanted to work with and trying new things we'd never done. Just get
mm.
bored, I think. I don't know if there's an element of like a touch of the ADHD about that, but I get fed up. I don't want to make the same thing over and over.
Hmm. No,
Um,
it's
you
really
know what I mean?
interesting that your whole approach is like, let's get the gang together. I'm going to ask you a bit more about that, but first of all, you mentioned Helen Crawford. I mean, that was another
Mm,
project that you did in
mm,
stained glass. Um,
yeah.
so how did you choose? Like, so Helen Crawford, Jessie Soga were both Scottish suffragettes, as I understand it.
Yes.
So how did you choose them as the two central figures for the work?
So at that time, we were working, or I was working with Simi Community Development Trust,
Mm,
excuse me, in Townhead. And that had quite an interesting diaspora of young people, loads of different backgrounds, loads of young women of colour. So we were like, right, what our remit was to come in and talk a little bit about Glasgow history because you're just new to a place or you're second generation, your parents have just moved here. I think part of that integration is also learning the history, the shared cultures, of what people were fighting for, women's suffrage or supporting refugees to say even 100 years ago, just knowing that you're not the first, you're not, right? So I then got in touch with protesting suffragettes and they produced this kind of educational resource, which is like a top trumps deck.
mm,
So we went through the deck with the kids and we played with the kids, and then the kids selected the uh, suffragettes. And one of them was Jessie Soga, who's Scotland's only documented suffragette of colour. So there were like no pictures of her or anything. We just know that she exists. And we do think that Helen Crawford knew about her through letters because we met with like archivists and all this kind of thing. That's part of the thing as well, is for me, is about opening up those public spaces to folk, even though they are supposedly open and free. If you're working class, I mean, those are intimidating spaces. I didn't go to the Mitchell Library until I was well in my 30s because I didn't think it was for me.
mm,
And that's not their fault. That's also a confidence thing. That's the psychology of being poor and all of that. So part of our thing is to say these resources are here. We can use them. They're for us. You know what I mean? And open all that out.
mm.
So yeah, that's how we came up with those two suffragettes.
Yeah, and do you think Helen Crawford is a figure who's sort of well known in feminist spaces in Scotland?
No, no, I don't, because she was a communist.
Yeah.
And she might be known as a suffragette, but she was radical. Her work was always about uh, freeing women from childbirth as well, supporting the pill. Fight. She was venomously anti-war. Uh, about why are working class people bombing other working class people? Our sons are dying for what? So I don't think they know that. They maybe know, oh, Helen Crawford, Mary Barber, people will be able to know through the rent
Mm,
strikes. Helen Crawford was also involved with that. She went, she did loads of things throughout her whole career, her and Barbara both. I mean, these women were not just in it for a bit. I mean, Sylvia Pankhurst is quite, no, she's all right. Who's the mum? Emmeline, and then Christabel's got a terrible reputation because afterwards she went out to New Zealand and was involved in eugenics, was an absolute racist.
Mm.
And, so it's like, and then we don't talk about that. Well, we need to talk about these women because that feminism is part of one wider socialist project for a lot of these women. And when it's not, I'm suspicious.
Yeah, yeah.
You
Oh,
know?
that's fascinating. I mean, you mentioned, I think it was called Scud. Yeah,
Oh,
the zine that we briefly worked on together. I
Society
think I
for
produced a
Crushing
piece for that.
Useless Dick.
The Society for Crushing Useless Dick. Thank you. I was struggling to remember what the acronym was for.
Because their thing was like, we're not saying all dick is useless, but when it is, crush it.
I mean,
Nonsense.
that at that point, I think you were pulling that scene together and getting loads of contributors involved, just like you do with your glass projects. We did a wee launch for it as well.
We
I
did.
remember, but Glasgow since then has become a little bit of a hotbed of zine making. I mean, particularly centered around the Glasgow Zine Library.
Yeah.
What attracts you though to the zine as a forum, and are you still sort of producing zine-like stuff?
Well, one, they're cheap to produce. I love the old copy and paste, and they come from that kind of right girl movement. I mean, hello, it's brilliant. Their origins are feminist and punk. I mean, what's more to like about that? I think some people forget that or don't know it.
Mm,
That they're meant to be DIY. Anyone can do them. They're cheap. Aye, no, I love it. I love the aesthetic of it as well. That kind of messy, multiple text. I actually try and make my windows look a bit like that. I'm not saying I
interesting.
succeed, but I certainly try to do that with the
Yeah,
text.
so there's a bit of cross pollination there. Do you think, particularly in we're always talking now about like, oh, we need to get off our phones, we need to get kids off their phones, we need to spend less time online. Do you feel like there are aspects of zine making culture that could contribute to that? Because it's not
Yeah.
just about the experience of making and printing these things yourself. They happen in the community, right? Like zines are things you collaborate on.
Yeah, and I think the responses to things, that's the thing about them, they're dialogues. They're
Mm,
dialogues with issues, with whether it's a political one, a personal one, or both. Y- Zines are responses. Because of that, they're kind of urgent, they're imminent, they're in the moment. And I think there's something very interesting about that. Things can become, I know you can argue with comments and then threads just secure and they cease to be in the moment, where zines are a bit like that, I think. Yeah. And obviously, working with your hands, the act of making a zine as well, the ritual of it is quite a pleasing, pleasant experience. I mean, there's loads of also like great research about what's happening to your neurons when you're doing that, and being creative and making and working with your hands anyway. But yeah, I mean,
mm,
anyone who's made anything knows the joy of making a thing, whether it's planting a tree or baking a loaf of bread or whatever.
mm,
So yeah, zines are definitely the way to do it. And with the community as well, you can use them in different ways. They can increase. I mean, sometimes where I'm working in communities, literacy is low, so it's a good way of think looking at literacy and engaging with it that's not as intimidating.
mm,
So because I'm very up, the Freudian kind of methodology, I think literacy is key. So what I'm also really about is building political literacy, right? And sometimes you have to build actual literacy in order to get to that point, or media literacy, or whatever it is we're doing to combat that, because we're just consuming dominant right wing ideology constantly. So we're trying to combat that all the time and politicize people along the way. So zines are a great way of doing that, yeah.
mm. And I guess it also just democratizes that idea
Of art,
of access to printing things, disseminating things, having a platform,
writing,
and
art, literature,
yeah,
all of it.
and it divorces it from that online idea of a platform.
Mm.
Like having a platform online, whether you're successful or not, it's never going to be enough. If you've got 10,000 people
Yeah,
following you, you want 20,000. If you've got 20,000, you want 500,000, and
yeah,
so on up the scale. Whereas with a zine, if you've put out a zine and it struck a chord with someone, and you meet that one person in real life, you feel like you've done a good job, right? Your zine's
yeah.
reached someone. um yeah, I'm a big believer in the zine as a forum being something that young people might reclaim and get a lot out of. because it can like scratch that itch of giving you a platform without
Yeah,
having the toxic aspects of
it
online platforms.
it's interesting. I've just I came back from a visit recently. I was doing a wee job with Community Land Scotland, so they've kind of helped me out and given me some funding towards the play, because the play is also about land. We'll talk about that later. But basically, I went on a wee jolly up to Kinloch Oban, and met a bunch of people who operate, community landowners who have set up community land trusts, right? And I've been invited up to Arisaig by one community trust to do a zine making workshop, because I was showing them zines and ways to engage. And the idea is that basically we're going to take lots of the history of the trust and ask young people to curate. They've taken over a little museum and they want to put the first exhibitions about the history of the trust. So it's like young people who don't really know about that, because they're always trying to recruit young people. These can be very small island communities, right, to the trust and get them engaged with it. So I was like, let's commission the young people basically to produce the guide using archive material, photocopied archive material, to make this cool zine that also operates as the guide. So it's their language, their sense of the trust, but they're also learning about the history of the community trust as they do it. They've been given this kind of job, this kind of commission. So I'm off up to do that soon. So that's quite exciting. But yeah,
Nice.
but so it's like you can have kind of a formal way of looking at it within that method of teaching literacy, political education, etc., but using quite radical format like a zine, which is kind of what
That's
we're
really
all
good.
about, I think,
Yeah.
our little collective.
So in the past year or two, you've begun developing this new piece of workers' theatre
Yes.
called The Fire That Never Went Out. So
Mhm.
tell me about the genesis of this, and
Oh,
maybe a little bit about what workers' theatre is for people who are listening who might not have heard of, the Glasgow take on workers'
okay.
theatre.
Okay, so I'll start with the workers' theatre thing. So workers' theatre, I suppose it's different. It has like kind of the British workers' theatre of the 30s, is very about inspired by kind of Soviet, you know, kind of and German expressionist kind of Brechtian kind of theatre, where it's like it's not about sheer escapism for the audience. It's political theatre. You're always aware you're watching a play. It's stories about our real lives, about our work situations. How do we change it? It's about the revolutionary overtones. And then I suppose British theatre was workers' theatre was kind of about taking those things. In Scotland, though, you had plays a bit like Ina Lamont's Men Should Weep, which was an example, obviously, is an example of workers' theatre, which instead of going to see some nice middle class murder mystery, you're off to see Glasgow women living in tenements and struggling with drunken husbands, right?
Mm,
And the kind of things you have to go through to feed your kids. And 784 famously redid this in the 70s, but interestingly, they changed the ending to a much more upbeat ending. They took out the death of a child, I think, is the
mm.
difference. So it's interesting to read these two. So make it more palatable for a 70s audience. So that's kind of interesting as well. So in the 70s, I would say workers' theatre in Scotland is a bit more, it has a bit more pantomime, joke, humour. When you think of 784, they use comedy songs, familiar songs, they use vaudeville, music hall. John McGrath wrote this great book, which really has influenced me, called A Good Night Out. And he talks about, working class people have their own version of theatre. They go to working men's clubs, they see stand-ups, they see music, they watch variety shows. And actually part of that has made me try and create the play a little bit like a variety show, which has sort of helped us because it means you can perform scenes as little skits at festivals, art galleries, poetry nights, but out with the main narrative, and it will still kind of work as a bit.
That's
But then
great.
you've
Yeah.
got this entire, so that's actually been the most useful book I've read. And it's a great kind of analysis of class and theatre, as is it Peter Brook's Empty Space? That's a great look about. He talks about bourgeois theatre being dead theatre. So those were quite influential books. But so yeah, Joey Simon's my old work buddy. He's a much more of a scholar on workers' theatre. I do personally like the 70s Scottish kind of workers' theatre and Dario Fo Italian theatre, which uses comedy to challenge these kind of things and the absurdity of the systems of which kind of manipulate and control us. And I think for me, especially if you're opening this up to a Glasgow audience, you need to give them a laugh. You need to give people a
Mm.
good time. And I don't think it has to be completely po-faced. You know, we can do that and still make a strong piece of political work. But I use humour to deflect from that kind of thing. So if that's just what you're going to get.
Yeah, absolutely.
Mm.
So that's great. That's given us some
Thanks,
context
sorry.
for kind of what workers' theatre is. So, what was the genesis of this? What was like the seed of this play?
So
Then, where did it begin for you?
well, it's interesting because it was we our studio were doing the stained glass repairs at Craigallien House. So whenever we do a job, Richard Welsh, partner in crime, and he runs RDW, he just researches the whole area and the history of the house, and that's I think also what clients like about us because we're interested in that social history as well, right? But I'd never heard of the fire, so the fire sits just across the loch, wee Craigallien Loch, at what is now the beginning of the West Highland Way. Um, so I just became obsessed with it. I mean, I just became obsessed with this idea of the fire, and I knew that I wanted to make a piece of work about it. So originally I thought, oh, let's do a radio play because I love radio. It's my favourite medium. And it's so intimate, and being around a fire is intimate, and you can have the crackle of the fire. But it just ended up, all the conversations I read about it. I mean, this has really been about 3 years overall. I read all these books and books, looking for references, Jock Nimlin, whatever else, and it just evolved. I started writing it, and it was like, this isn't a radio play. This is now a thing, and it just became a thing. There
Mm.
wasn't a plan. You know how these things go, and you just become obsessed. No, you're just, no. Does that not happen to you?
Oh no, absolutely. I mean, it's like I was going to say snowball effect, but it's the opposite. It's like it catching fire, isn't it? So,
Yeah, and then it became a thing, and I started inviting other people in. And then, Dr. Normal wrote some songs, Kieran Stewart made some films, Joey Simons gave some advice and wrote some little Brechtian poem intros for each scene, and here we are. You know,
mm.
now we have a play and we're doing it.
so,
Crazy.
so what is the actual story of the Craig Allen fire?
Okay, so the Craigallien Fire is a historic campfire that reputedly burned for 20 years continuously. So I really like this idea of myth that it never went out. And it was, we think that it was originally a traveller fire, but it's quite hard to find actual documentation about that. There's just sort of references to place names, Tinker's Loan and things like that. And it was a kind of stopping point at the beginning of the working class outdoor movement. So when the depression in the kind of mid 20s, but 1919 is when we think it was kind of right, its origin. So people were escaping the drudgery of poverty and unemployment from Glasgow, and they were seeking the hills. And it was also a bit of a reaction to that kind of Victorian idea of the Highlands or the outdoors being this gentleman's pursuit. So there
Mm.
was a kind of a birth of that working class. We want better. We want to escape the slumming conditions we're in. The hills are ours, right? Um, so the fire became a bit of a it started as a pit stop, I think, but it became a destination in its own right because what you were finding, it was socialists, anarchists, communists that met there. So it became a place where people would go and talk revolution.
Mm.
So Carbeth huts kind of grew out of that big socialist experiment just down the road, because is it William Ferris? William Ferris. He's a bit of a socialist Glasgow legend. I'd like to do something on him at some point. But he was first chairman of the Citizens Theatre, ran clarion clubs. He founded the Carbeth Huts. He was the first person to pitch tents, get permission from the landlord to pitch tents for recuperating soldiers returning from the First World War. That's what Carbeth Huts' origin is. But then it became a place where working class people could enjoy living in the countryside. It wasn't just the privilege of merchants, right? At that time. And then they were having conversations about access to land right away. You've got a new generation of fire sitters come in. Jock Nimlin, who became a very famous mountaineer. He ended up writing about that. He wrote a lovely biographical essay about the fire called May the Fire Always Be Lit. And in that essay, I learned that there was a fire chant they always sang when they met. And all of these little details kind of gone into the play. Tom Weir was there, Bob Grieve, who was a famous urban planner. So it just, and then lots of people who then went off and fought Franco. So it just became, I was like, oh, it represents a lot of Scottish working class history, Glaswegian or Clydeside radical history that I'm interested in. What if we do a play about the fire, the people that sat there, but also ask, could we have a Craigallon fire today and what would it look like? So that's the main thing, is also, why is the story important to tell now? Because it's like, does the Craigallon fire exist? And really my play says, yes, it does. It exists in the radical resistance, the histories of resistance in communities and schemes throughout Scotland. And the last scene of the play is always going to be made with the people, the community in which we show it. So we know our very debut performance is going to be Easter House. So currently I'm developing the last scene, which is also a kind of template for a workshop, right? With people in Easter House to tell the radical history of Easter House. So that's really the premise of the play. So it's not just about this play. It's really about having this living, breathing thing that we can take to other communities in Scotland and say, what are your stories of resistance, histories of resistance, and collect them, so the ending always changes because the fire is still lit.
That's fascinating. I think the last time we were talking about it, you mentioned some of this, and you said all these communities have their own fire stories. I now see how that sort of fits into the end. What are some of the challenges about trying to get people involved? And I wonder if you have sort of like any idea of what the outcomes are for the participants after they've been involved in something like this. Are there challenges getting them involved, and do they get something out of it?
So with this particular one, I'm working with a group that I know really well. I've been
Mm,
working on and off in East House for 5 years. I've got relationships, friendships with folk. We made a stained glass window together. So there's an element of trust that I think I need, because this is all new to me, that I've never done this before. I'm not going in as a sure pair of hands. I mean, our main thing is about a lot of artists, and this is not artists' fault per se, although they have to take some personal responsibility for it, but they'll go into communities and extract only. And they'll
mm,
extract time and creative labour and present it as, it's up to you, it's your voice, whatever you think. And it's not good enough, because you're going in there with skills that people don't haven't privileges and access to stuff that they don't have. It's your duty to share that privilege, those skills. You have to give something as well. Right? It's not enough to go, oh, I learned so much. Yeah, you did learn loads. What did you teach? What did you give? So our whole way of working is very like that. And because this was a new process, I felt like I had to do it with a group that I knew, that knew me, that trusted me. Because we're asking people to share personal stuff, their own stories and histories, and their own connections to movements and struggles. They have to know that you're not going to abuse that. Do you know what I mean?
yeah, yeah.
So I think this is our kind of development phase, is to create a kind of workshop that we can then take in. And part of me as well is building solidarity and connections with communities, so we can go to those communities that know us, know who we are.
Hmm.
And that way I think it's okay, because you're meeting as equals
Yeah,
round the fire kind of thing.
yeah. And I guess this is part of restarting a tradition of workers' theatre, which is
Yes.
something you've talked about wanting to do, is that if you can successfully do this in one community, then you can do it in two, you can do it in five.
Mm-hmm.
And then by the time you're doing your third project, everyone's looking forward to welcoming you back. Is that
Yeah.
something you have sort of in your long-term vision,
Yeah.
is to keep this going? And
Yes, because I mean, we're losing spaces all the time. Working class history is getting lost, and nobody's preserving it, and it's really difficult. We see big funding cuts, so our whole thing is like we've got a wee bit of money just now. How do we extract as much value from that funding, that relationship, that platform, so that when we can't come back as workers, but we'll be back as comrades, we've upskilled, we've learned as much as we possibly can. I mean, and the wider movement. I mean, one of the things I'm quite critical about, so much public money going into things like, I mean, I'm going to say it, but the Citizens Theatre, brilliant space. I love it, but why are people not making more plays? Why are working class people not making more plays? We've had all of this, community theatre. What's the point of community theatre if it's not teaching folk how to make their own plays, their own work, and then giving them a space to show that work, those plays? To me, that's public money. That's what that money is for. I'm not saying we do need interesting culture and programs to visit and go to, and that's great. I think they've got all that down, right? But this other bit we're not doing very successfully.
Yeah.
So really, the project is about that. I would love to see like what we used to see in the 90s with Mayfest. Every scheme has its own wee theatre festival, a big citywide workers' theatre festival would be great, or working class culture festival. I mean, amazing, bring it back. Why can't we do it? If not us, Bram, who?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Do you think, I mean, if you are looking for a job in the arts at the moment, whether you're
Good
looking
luck.
at arts administration or you're looking
Yeah.
for a job in the media, like I saw a Glasgow journalism job come up, and there's a rare as hen's teeth. And I think the top end of the wage scale was 36K, which you just never it'd be very easy to get a job making more than that with the skills you'd need to do that job, which I
Mhm.
think is why you see so many people, leaving those industries. And so it becomes a thing where unless you sort of have a bit of generational wealth, it's very, very hard to do those jobs. So the people who are in the gatekeeping positions
Mhm.
often tend to be middle class or upper class.
Yeah.
But do you get the sense there is a hunger from those people to support working class artists or find working class artists to work with, or do are they gatekeeping working class artists and organizations out of funding opportunities, coverage? What's the situation with that like at the
So,
moment?
actually, this is really great, this question, because I got a bit incensed with something online earlier, and I had to step away because I was like, "What is this?" And it was basically a kind of conference, about, uh, working class lives as method in creative practice. And I had to be look at it, and I was like, "Wait a fucking minute." So hold on a second. So my working class method, right, also involves the material conditions of my life. And at this particular moment in time, I am homeless and I'm splitting my time in this lovely room here with my daughter and my partner whilst I search for a house. Is that what you mean? So your methodology, you want me to explain the material conditions of my life and how they affect how I make work, and then for what purpose to recreate them? Like what is that? How does that help me?
Mm,
Plus then I asked this question, who is this for? And they're like, this is for anyone who wants to attend. I'm like, well, I want to attend, but how do I get there? Who's going to pay for that? Am I to pay
mm,
for that? Am I to take time? So I just think there is a lot of surface level chat, but the problem is these things are being developed by middle class institutions and artists, probably in collaboration with working class artists. And the problem for me, they start from the wrong assumption, right? They assume that all working class artists want a seat at their middle class table. I don't want that. I think, fuck you, fuck your middle class table. I want a table of my own, and I'll invite you if and when I decide to. Do you get me? I don't want your middle class institution. The master's tools will never dismantle the master's house. What I'm trying to do is revolutionary. It's not about assimilating with you and your bourgeois art and values. And that is quite a strong position to take. I am aware of that, but that's how I feel about it.
No, I think that's great. And I mean, Darren McGarvey wrote about this in Poverty Safari in terms of the way organizations will come in and engage with the community, whether it's arts or not, is that
Yeah,
they almost take this ethnographic approach of, oh, we need to turn up here in this community and understand it and
yeah,
study it from a distance,
yeah.
rather than just coming in and empowering that community by giving them tools
And
or
money.
asking them what they need or giving them money. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, yeah, no, absolutely. Because you're down there in the trenches as well. Because also your life is that life as well. Like you're all,
Yeah.
everybody, it's chaotic as fuck.
Yeah.
These groups are not just you go in and do a job. I'm sorry. These are people, I know everything about them. I know about their lives. They know about mine.
Yeah.
Like we have that shared, and middle class people are always trying to recreate working class solidarity. They don't fucking get it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Stop trying to do that. You don't get
Yeah.
it. You'll never get it. You don't understand it.
Yeah, there's other ways to be an ally.
That's okay, and that's all right.
Yeah,
We can all be pals and hang out in the pub. But I get very incensed about that.
that's all good. That's all good. I mean, sometimes it does work out, right? Like sometimes an organization canny enough, like the one that you're building, manages to get some funding or an opportunity from a very mainstream
Oh, aye.
institution. And you've got one of these coming up. You're taking part in the Glasgow
Yes.
International Festival of Art. So what are you going to do with this opportunity? I'm quite excited to hear.
Well, what was great, I actually tell the wee story. It's quite funny, right? So the last GI, it's every 2 years, right? Joey had a show because he was working at the sculpture studios, and that particular position gets a wee show. And the director guy just loved him and loved his pattern and all that. So we had been doing a thing with young people in Townhead, which was a zine about Townhead and how it's the most regenerated area in Glasgow. Mental, right? Anyway, so we get a bit of the history and a bit of the kids and a bit of stuff. And we were at the library and the director turned up and I was chatting to him. And I was like, well, how'd you get this job then? He's dead nice, by the way, he's lovely. He's like, oh, well, I did, he was London, but nice, right? But posh London. And he was like, yeah, I did a few, I did some art things here and I did that. And he was very modest. And then he was like, and then I just got this job. And I was like, all right, is that all it takes? Aye. Wish I'd known that. I'd applied, right? And he was laughing. And he's like, and he was kind of apologising to me. I was like, don't apologise. I was like, but next time you're doing this festival, give a job or give a show. And then that's what he did. He just set that up. And I thought, that's quite cool. And then I met with the new festival director, Helen, who I just love her. And we just hit it off. And she just got what we're all about. She's from Orkney. Oh, no, she's not. Sorry, Shetland. She grew up in Shetland. And just same age as me. Just has worked really hard. I just really liked her. So we hit it off and that felt really nice. But that was basically it. But what we're doing as well is a GI show has never been this far out from the city centre before. So this show isn't really about for GI audiences. This show, or what we're trying to do, this project, is about getting working class people to come to GI shows because they don't. They don't come to the shows. And you've got to say, in a city like Glasgow, when most people are living in poverty and working class or below on the breadline, you've got an international arts festival worth millions of pounds, and it's not for those people, then what are you doing? So I'm kind of been in there to bridge the gap. So they were basically like, what do you need help with? And I thought, well, if I could take your contribution and make this project even bigger, that's what we've done. We've just kind of merged the two funding pots. And now my plan was always to bring in more artists. And now we've got 10 artists working on the project. And I've picked people that I'm no ashamed, but I like and that I know and that are working class.
Yeah.
And here we are.
Is this connected to the fire that never went out, or is it?
Yeah.
Okay.
So what we're doing for GI is we're doing a performance and we're making a film. Which film runs through our performance, but this is our extra budget is going into this. We've got an animator in, so we're learning the group. We're going to learn how to animate things, very exciting. But it's going to be a community performance of the last scene. So GI were just happy because they were like, "We love what you're doing. What do you need?" That's kind of what they did, and we went, "Well, we need this. Can we just do this as well?" And they were like, "No problem." So here we go.
Well, that's great. I'm really glad you've got that opportunity, but I'm also really glad that you went out and got that opportunity for yourself, if that makes sense.
Well, that's what you have to do. Just ask.
Yeah. No, you're an inspiration with that, I'm sure.
No, I'm like a Glaswegian woman who's just very direct. You're married to a woman like that, you know.
Indeed. I mean, so I think people will probably have gathered this from our conversation today. But your work's always so informed by your socialist politics.
Yes.
Who are some of the other writers or organizers or political figures you admire who we maybe haven't talked about today, or whose writing or actions have kind of inspired you?
So I would definitely talk about. I mean, there's so many people in Glasgow. I was actually yesterday or day before. I was in with the group. We went to the National Film Archive in Kelvin Hall. Amazing resource, by the way. People, I didn't even really know about it until about a year and a half ago. Anyway, and we selected Easter House films. And in our group is a really mix of folk residents, but you've also got like community leaders. Ian Montague, who was the editor of the radical newspaper The Voice. Um, and it was just the film, basically the STV kind of documentary, was people in Easter House who were involved with the Festival Society were kind of talking about, at that time in Glasgow, how the church was having a kind of debate about how they should engage with communities, and there was a lot of what we call libertarian theologists in the church, and I know some of them. So I would say Mary Miller, John Miller, and Castlemilk were great examples of libertarian theologists from the church who got their hands dirty and did so much in that community for folk. I mean, Mary Miller is beloved by my sort of living hero. That I've just suddenly forgotten her name because I want to say Kathy McCormick, but it's not. Kath Milligan in Castlemilk, who's been involved in organising there for decades, right? First as a youth worker, then through Castlemilk Against Austerity. She then ran for council, but that was really more about the campaign, right? She then set up a kind of women's conscience raising group, and now she runs a kind of community hub with Bridget Crossing in Castlemilk. They just took over a abandoned space at the Braes. And they feed their community, and they've opened up an art space now, and they just did that, by the way. And it got tiny little piecemeal bits of funding, 100 quid there, donations, mobilise people in their community, family and friends, people, their contacts, union people throughout the city, just people who wanted to help out, and they've got this amazing space now. So them, and then Kathy McCormick, who I've got a book here, passed away a couple of years ago, who wrote The Wee Yellow Butterfly, and that's her story. But her story's amazing. She was an Easter House anti-dampness poverty campaigner. I mean, she ended up talking to the UN. Her research, 10 years to get people to take her research seriously about the connections between damp and health, housing and health, right? And we are still seeing these excuses from landlords today, by the way, that, just open your window. You don't keep your windows open. It's your fault. No, it's not. It's the way you built the houses because you built them cheap. Do you know what I mean? So Kathy McCormick. I would also say, so the Coopers as well in Castlemilk, John Cooper. I mean, he ran the paper there, Castlemilk Today. His wife Carol set up the Julie Peace Club along with Mary Miller. They did so much radical work there. I mean, it's just in every scheme, in every place. These are two particular schemes that I know a lot about, Easter House and Castlemilk. And I would say I'd like to recommend this book, actually. I don't know. It's called by Carol Craig, called The Tears That Built the Clyde. And it's kind of about, it's one of the best books I've ever read about Glasgow. It explained my life to me. And it's kind of a sociological study about the Glasgow effect. Why, even though compared to other post-industrial cities, does Glasgow measure much higher in violence, and unhappiness and social deprivation compared to those counterparts? It's much more aligned with like South American countries. So she talks about the psychology of Glasgow. It's really interesting. Anybody working in communities in Glasgow should read this book. So Kathy McCormick, the Coopers, and you can look at a lot of their work at the Spirit of Revolt archive, which is available at the Mitchell Library. The work that's happening right now in Castlemilk in the community hub for the food, what they've got a weird name. It's like anti-food poverty superheroes. Kathy and Bridget. And then, that's it.
That's brilliant. So I mean, mate, honestly, I'm blown away by the depth of your knowledge and your passion for Glasgow's radical history. I think it's really amazing to have someone like you working to create artworks that are community specific, site specific, that celebrate that history.
Yeah.
I mean, we're in a really particularly turbulent time politically in the UK, worldwide. Like you say, things like damp and badly built flats are still a thing, despite the fact we're in 2026.
Mhm.
Where, if anywhere, do you see sort of glimmers of hope in this hellscape? Are there any politicians or political figures you'd feel happy representing you?
No. I mean, for me, that's dead. It's like, was it our pal Zizek when he talks about illusion and reality? I was having this conversation with my dad the other day, and he was like, "Oh, I was watching Channel 4 News, and I couldn't believe you think that'd be a more." And I was like, "This is illusion masquerading as reality." And I think parliamentary politics is kind of the same. This idea, something happens when people get into politics, it warps them, and it's the game is rigged. So you can change the players all you want. You're still going to get the same chat. We talk about political will to do stuff. No, that's not the right way to talk about it. These people have the political will to not do it, right? And they're engaging in that political will all the time. We cannot. Time is running out. We can't wait for them. We've got to organise locally together, build solidarity across communities, across schemes. So for me, that route is not of interest at all. I have no faith in that route at all. Even though a little councillor will come and cut the ribbon at my wee window unveiling, and but no, personally, I don't have any faith in that. But I do have in community organising, and I mean, just people impress you and amaze you all the time. I mean, we've got a guy. I'm in Living Rent as well, and me and this old guy, Keith, he's a living legend to the left, but I'm not going to name him. But he knows everything, right? He's still 70 years old. He's with me every Tuesday. We do housing outreach at the library. And really, a lot of the time, you're just trying to make appointments for folk. They're just rattled, man. They need somebody to talk to. They need to calm them down. You can get them appointments. You can organise translators. He's an expert in social housing. He was in the fight his whole life, in different capacities. He went back at 15, retrained in housing, did a master's, then became a housing officer. Like, he's all about making a difference. There's people like that all over the city, all over Scotland, all over the UK, right? And it's people like that, to me, that's how we're going to do it, because they never quit, they never give up. This socialist project is a lifetime's project, and it's brutal and it's hard, and you rarely win. But what else are you going to do? You know what I mean? And it's when you find people like Keith and me, and just, he's 20 years older than me, just chatting, learning from him, that knowledge, that history, just exciting. And hopefully we eventually will do that for others. I do have younger people coming up to me going, Keira, and you're like, oh my God, it's me now. We're the elders. What happened? Terrifying. But
I love it.
think there's so much resistance, though. There is. People are fighting, and people surprise you. I mean, what was it Berger says? You only need solidarity in hell. And I do believe that the worst things get, people will turn out.
Yeah.
But we do have to organise, and so we can support that when it happens. I mean, look what's happening in America with the ICE stuff, but how the community were responding. I mean, amazing, that response. That was they were hiding people. They were acting as white decoys. They were absolutely banding together. And part of that as well is because organised networks had been, even if it was just embers of the fire, they were still out there organising, making connections, building solidarity, so that when that real crisis occurs, we're there. Ken Muir Street's a perfect example of that.
Yeah, and we've got that documentary coming out about that soon as well. I may definitely link to that.
Yeah. Anyway, sorry.
No, that's a fantastic. That's a fantastic place to leave it. I think you're talking about embers, and we were talking earlier about the idea of the fire that exists, or the potential for a fire that exists within all of these communities. I am glad that there's someone like you out there blowing on those embers, and I hope they catch fire. It's been an absolute pleasure speaking to you. Thank you very much for coming on the show, Keira.
Thank you. Thanks so much for having me.
Lovely. So you have been listening to Strange Exiles, a podcast about ideas, identity, and ideology, hosted and produced by me, Bram E. Gieben. My guest today was Keira McLean. You can find her on Instagram as Keira McLean Glass, where you will find links to some of her zines and other works, some photos of her beautiful stained glass work, and of course, news about her theatre activities and workshops. So if this was the first episode you've checked out, thank you very much for listening and subscribing. You can join in the conversation at strangeexiles.substack.com, where you'll find a host of links, reading recommendations, and the names of the thinkers and writers that Keira and I discussed in this episode. I'm actually really looking forward to digging into some of the names that Keira dropped today and learning a bit more. Over my shoulder as well, you can see a few books up there, including The Darkest Timeline, which is my book still available from Revol Press. Little plug there. So yeah, thank you for tuning in. And until next time, take care of each other.